Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating paradigm shift in how we interact with the natural world. If you've ever felt like maintaining a landscape, a farm, or honestly, even just a backyard garden is this endless, exhausting battle, well, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to break down the core attitudinal and functional design principles of permaculture, specifically zeroing in on the brilliant insights of its co-founder, Bill Mollison. We'll discover how ultimate efficiency in design actually comes from fundamentally rewiring how we think and ultimately stepping back to let the ecosystem itself do all the heavy lifting.
Which actually brings us to a pretty profound question to kick things off. Why do we constantly fight nature to grow our food and manage our land? We so often operate under this illusion of total control, right? We treat our living landscapes exactly like factory floors. We spray, we till, we weed, and we constantly pump in massive amounts of our own energy just to maintain a really fragile status quo. It's exhausting just thinking about it. But what if this constant uphill struggle is actually just a massive failure in design?
The source material highlights a massive clash of paradigms here. On one side, you have the mechanical worldview. This is your standard factory-style management. It engineers for one single product, it demands super heavy external inputs, it spits out unused toxic waste, and it leaves the whole system incredibly vulnerable to environmental shocks. On the flip side, we have the ecological worldview, and this is exactly where we need to transition. It's all about aligning our human aspirations with natural processes, building decentralized, self-reliant systems that close loops to totally eliminate waste. It's about moving away from trying to dominate a landscape and instead finally partnering with it.
Bill Mollison, the co-founder of permaculture, absolutely nailed this concept. He defines permaculture not just as a toolkit of gardening techniques, but as a core philosophy. Notice the contrast he draws here: protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless labor. Before we even think about picking up a shovel, we have to completely change our perspective. We basically have to design with our minds long before we ever build with our hands.
Okay, so picture ecological design almost like a continuous flowing blueprint. Step one, we sit back and observe the existing energy flows. We're talking the sun, the water, the wind, all of it. Step two, human intervention steps in to integrate those resources, carefully guiding these natural energies so they intersect productively. And boom, step three, this thoughtful integration converts those passing energies into a self-sustaining yield, generating a massive systemic surplus. This exact flow is how we move a system from scarcity to absolute abundance.
So the really crucial point here is how we define what we actually get out of this system. And that brings us to our first major focus principle from Mollison. The yield is limited only by imagination. In mechanical systems, you tend to think a flat plot of land can only produce a fixed physical limit of corn or wheat. But in ecological design, productivity is entirely nonlinear. By increasing spatial complexity and thoughtfully stacking how resources integrate with one another, the potential output expands exponentially. The limit isn't the dirt in the ground, it's our creativity. And building right off that last point, yield is actually a reflection of you. It's the sum total of surplus energy produced, conserved, or reused by the design. Meaning, if a system isn't yielding, it's not because the land is poor or broken. It's simply because the designer hasn't quite comprehended how to properly connect the elements yet. A lack of yield is, at its core, just a lack of understanding. It's like a giant puzzle waiting to be solved. But hey, this brings up a really fantastic question, right? If human imagination and comprehension are the only real limits to our yield, who is actually out there doing the physical heavy lifting in the dirt? Because if we are just doing all the clever thinking, someone or something has to be doing the actual physical labor to generate that surplus. Well, the answer lies in our second focus principle. Everything gardens. The paradigm-shifting reality here is that you are not the only gardener on your land. Not even close. Every single biotic element, every little earthworm, every deep-rooted weed, every bird, every network of fungi, they actively modify, cultivate, and shape their own habitat. They are all working, living components that are constantly actively guarding the environment around them to suit their own needs. Let's look at a classic, real-world example of this in action, the Three Sisters method. This is what we call stacking functions in partnership. The beans are gardening by fixing nitrogen in the soil for the other plants. The corn is gardening by growing nice and tall, providing a physical trellis for those beans to climb. And the squash? It's gardening by spreading its huge leaves over the ground, acting like a living mulch to retain water and shade out competitive weeds. They are actively gardening for each other. This drastically reduces structural friction and completely eliminates the need for human labor to fertilize, trellis, or weed. Nature is literally doing the work for you. Hold on a second, though. If everything in nature already gardens, and they clearly do it perfectly well together, where exactly does that leave us? What is the human designer's actual job in this system if we aren't the ones out there pulling the weeds and spreading the fertilizer? That brings us right to our third focus principle, information as a resource. In this framework, your absolute greatest asset isn't a shiny new tractor or a bag of synthetic fertilizer, it's data. It's your thoughtful, patient observation of how the sun moves across your site, where the rainwater naturally pools, and which specific plants support one another. But keep in mind, it is merely a potential resource at first. It only becomes a true, powerful resource when you actually obtain that knowledge and intentionally act upon it to guide the system. To really get a handle on how we use that information, let's look at Donella Meadows' framework for system leverage points. Step 1, which is the shallowest change, is just modifying physical parameters. Think of this like switching from chemical fertilizer to organic fertilizer. It's definitely better, but it doesn't actually change the system itself. Step 2 goes deeper, reorganizing information flows, just like we discussed, observing and connecting natural elements differently. But step 3, that is the deepest leverage point of all, shifting the entire paradigm. It's completely throwing out our goal of dominating the land and replacing it with total cooperation. And that deep paradigm shift transforms our role entirely. The human designer acts as an ecological conductor. Just think about it. A conductor doesn't actually play the violins or the cellos, and similarly, you don't do the physical gardening. Your job is to use information to position elements relative to each other so that the natural output of one biological worker perfectly feeds the input of the next. You are simply guiding the symphony of energy flows so the whole system harmonizes. So, okay, you've observed the site, you've placed the elements brilliantly, and the biological workers are absolutely thriving. Which leads to a pretty pivotal question. What happens when the ecosystem learns to play this symphony entirely on its own? Seriously, what does the conductor do when the orchestra no longer needs them to keep the tempo? This introduces our final and honestly probably our most challenging focus principle, a policy of responsibility, which Mollison also frames as relinquishing power. The ultimate role of a successful ecological design is to create a self-managed system. Your goal as a designer is, quite literally, to design yourself out of a job. If your system requires your constant daily authority and intervention just to survive, well, the design is incomplete. Mollison states this so powerfully. He says, the role of beneficial authority is to return function and responsibility to life and to people. This right here is the true philosophical depth of permaculture. We use our authority and our imagination initially to set up all those beneficial connections, but true success is voluntarily handing that function right back to the living ecosystem. We move completely 100% away from human dominance. Now, this handoff doesn't happen overnight. It goes in distinct phases. Step 1 requires intensive human observation and design. That's all the heavy mental lifting up front. Step 2 kicks in as natural succession takes over. The plants establish themselves, the soil biology awakens, and our physical intervention drops sharply. And finally, we reach step 3, full ecosystem self-management. The system matures, it regulates itself, and it requires absolutely minimal to no maintenance from us. And you can really see this stark difference in the final outcomes. A failed design is one that requires constant, endless injections of external energy. We're talking backbreaking human labor, fossil fuels, synthetic chemicals. And in return, it produces toxic waste, which Mollison brilliantly calls an unused yield. A successful design, however, generates a massive systemic surplus of energy, food, and resources, and it self-regulates. It actually takes care of itself while it provides for you. All right, let's pull all of these focus principles together into what we can confidently call the human-nature partnership. You observe and utilize natural patterns. You fully embrace spatial complexity. Because remember, your yield is only limited by your imagination. You let the biological elements do the manual labor, because everything gardens. You act on critical information as your primary resource. And finally, you step back and relinquish power as the system matures. Your imagination creates the blueprint for sure, but nature builds the house. We've covered a pretty profound mental shift today, haven't we? From trying to dominate the world around us to thoughtfully conducting it, and ultimately trusting it enough to manage itself. So I want to leave you with this provocative final thought. What power are you ready to relinquish to nature today?
whether it's in a tiny backyard garden, a massive agricultural project, or even just how you organize your own community. Look for where you are forcing the system and ask yourself how you can step back and simply let the ecosystem thrive. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.